Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy.
Well, greetings everyone. It is Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy, for our sixth, I'm not going to say the word final because I have a feeling we're going to be doing a few more podcasts together, Jane. But we are here in week 6. It's great to visit with you again today. Thank you.
Well, there's no better way to start the day than a cup of coffee and you. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that. And over the past 6 weeks, we've just really touched on a variety of topics in our series, Prepared to Care. But briefly, I'm going to remind our listeners our topics these past 6 weeks. We first started off with Call to Care, and then we delightful conversation about change is the norm. We moved into third week with resistance to assistance. Goodness, we just don't feel comfortable asking for help. But we kind of talked that through on our third week. Then we got into some really wonderful discussions about the blessings of hospice and palliative care in week 4. Week 5, we touched about, grief and loss and what do you have to lose. And today we're going to talk about life after caregiving. And I think you might agree with this, that there's two very common aspects to caregiving. There's a beginning and an end. And in most cases, we're not prepared for either one of these life-changing events. Life after caregiving is not something that's often talked about, but it really is a part of our caregiving journey.
Well, it certainly is, and it's a very daunting experience for some people, frightening, and I think the transition is somewhat unexpected in that in the midst of caregiving, we have to admit that no matter how much we love the person, caregiving is hard. It can be hard and stressful and filled with sorrow and sadness, and then there are days and moments when we have joy. It's all of that. It's the mixed bag of emotions. And oftentimes in the midst of that, we are anticipating the end of that journey if we're dealing with a progressive or terminal illness, a disease process. But then when it happens, we're not only grieving the death of someone that we've cared for, but we also, whether we realize it or not, we're also grieving the loss of our role as caregiver.
Right.
And so we wake up the next day and we're wondering, okay, so what am I supposed to do today? Because the routine has totally changed.
Right, and it gets to the point to where you feel like, goodness, you don't feel like you're even needed.
Right, because there is that sense I identify as I need to do this, I'm supposed to do that, I want to do this for my mother, my husband, my partner, whomever. And then when you don't feel as if you are supposed to be anywhere, you're at loose ends.
Oh, goodness, you're conjuring up a lot of thoughts in my mind about my experience with life after caregiving. And because for me, I just had a sense of loss, not only of loss of missing the person that I was caring for, but a loss of my companion, my best friend. In a sense, my purpose. We get wrapped up in the day-to-day aspects of caregiving, and then all of a sudden it ends, and you're left with what to do next.
Mm-hmm. And I think everybody is going to react to that transition. We talked about change in our second module, our second podcast. Everybody responds to the aftermath of that change differently. Some people, they're so overwhelmed with their sadness and their sorrow, they kind of withdraw, maybe disconnect from life. There are other people that they feel as if they have to get busy and do something. And so activity is their diversion, but they're not paying attention to their emotions. And we talked about the importance of mourning our losses in our last conversation. And we all are going to do this uniquely because we have a unique experience of loss. And so it's not to try to figure out how to do this correctly. There is no one right way to deal with this transition. But the first thing I always advise people to do is to be gentle. Be gentle with yourself. And don't expect to move through this transition in an efficient and effective manner. There are going to be days where you feel like you're just spinning your wheels, and that's okay. So this is a time where we have to shift from being a caregiver to someone else, because what happens oftentimes is when the responsibility of being a caregiver is no longer there, our shoulders can drop, we have less stress, and we are at higher risk, proven by research. As a caregiver, we are at higher risk of morbidity and mortality in the year following the death of someone that we've loved. We have an increased risk of having a significant disease process and ultimately dying because we haven't taken good care of ourselves. So we need to start getting the rest that we need, and exercise, and good nutrition, and going back to the doctor for some wellness checkups. We have to also deal with our grief. We have to mourn that loss. And we have to give ourselves a gift of time to figure out where our next step will lead us. We have to get our bearings.
You know, that old cliche comes to mind, time heals all wounds. You know, and in essence, that's true, but in order for wounds to heal, we have to be nurtured. We have to allow the healing process to come in, and because there's really no magic formula that any of us can anticipate after caregiving ends. We can be kind to ourselves. We can surround ourselves with family and friends. And sometimes it's okay to have a good cry, laugh, hug somebody. Mm-hmm. I often thought of driving down the road and something had reminded me about Richard. I just pulled over and had a good cry. It was cathartic. We have to allow ourselves to be the change that has just taken place in our lives.
Mm-hmm. And I think just to give ourselves permission, what you just articulated is to feel what you feel when you feel it. So if it is in the midst of rush hour traffic and you want to have a crying jag, pull over and feel that. And we also need to give ourselves permission to feel joy again as well. And I think a lot of the caregivers that I speak with oftentimes feel guilty when they start feeling a sense of relief and maybe a moment of happiness, even into the realm of joy, because they feel like they shouldn't. And my loved one just died 9 months ago or a year ago, and I should still be sad. It's to give ourselves permission to feel both and. We can still grieve the loss of our loved one, and we can be joyful as well. And that is not being disrespectful. It is realizing that one step at a time, we are continuing to live and move on and engage with life.
We talked a little bit about this before we started the recording today, and it just really came to mind again in our conversation about, I believe, the three common things that we experience. There's relief, yes, that there's relief that caregiving has ended and that, the person that you're caring for, they're now pain-free. There's sadness that the life that you have once had together has now forever changed, and two lives have really been changed. And then that most difficult one that we all sometimes have a difficulty avoiding is that guilt that you're moving on without the person that you care for. And then as the process has evolved for me, I've added two more that along the road of life after caregiving is, acceptance that you did a good job and that everything you did everything that you could have done. And the destiny was already preset. Thus, nothing more that we could have done to change that destiny. And then you get to a point to where you have to take action. The time frame for me from acceptance to taking action, I'd say was probably about 15 to 18 months before I really felt that it was time for me to take action and not so much move on from my grief, but move on in life as Richard would have wanted me to.
Mm-hmm. And I think that time frame that you noted between your acceptance and then taking action, I think one thing we need to recognize that everybody has a different timeline and a different pace. And so oftentimes when we are the observer of someone that we know who's suffered a significant loss, sometimes we are wondering, well, what's taking them so long? Or maybe they moved a lot faster than we ever expected because their pace is not comfortable for us to witness. And that's where I'm always reminded that as I'm a companion to my friends and my colleagues in the community that have suffered loss, it's not for me to set the speed of how they choose to re-engage life. My invitation is to match my pace to theirs and to walk with them, not to pull them along or try to push them, but just to be with them step by step. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts, and sometimes the only gift we have to offer someone in the aftermath of a long journey of caregiving, to be with them and to walk with them.
Oh, goodness, very powerful. And that could be as simple as people staying in touch with one another. One of the components of caregiving that happens, especially, and we talked about this in one of our earlier podcasts, about resistance to assistance and reaching out for help. Oftentimes what happens in the midst of caregiving, that we do lose touch with some of our friends. We lose touch with our hobbies. Because we're so focused on the care of somebody else, then all of a sudden it ends, and those relationships have changed. We're looking at new hobbies. We find a way to re-engage at work so that we can be a part of life in a different way. But it just doesn't come overnight. It's not something that we could just snap our fingers and say, we're going to do this.
And I think related to our discussion about change and transition, when the journey of caregiving ends, I've talked to many a caregiver that said, well, now I'm going to go back to claim my life. And my conversation is reframe it to say, perhaps you re-engage your job, on a full-time basis, if perhaps they've had to take an extended leave. But I said, you're never going to go back to what was. Right. It will never feel like the old normal. You may be in the same place, but based on what you've experienced, you are a different person. You see life differently now. And so it is this process of moving toward that new normal, embracing that new beginning, and really reinventing yourself. And some people find that very frightening because it has a lot of mystery and unknown about it. Mm-hmm. But if we can be fascinated about the opportunity for recreation, then we get curious and we start to explore and we start to think, well, what if I were to do this? And maybe you change your job because now you have a totally different perspective of life with different priorities. And maybe going through the motions at work is no longer satisfying and you want something more meaningful. Well, that's a positive to come out of that journey.
Right. In our anticipation of life after caregiving, we can be a little bit proactive, having a mindset, being aware that there is going to be a change, and how can we put ourselves in a position not only just to accept that change that's coming down the road, but to recognize that it is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an intentional choice to be that aware and to be that proactive. Now, you don't have to do it day after the caregiving journey ends. Again, it's about being gentle. It's pacing yourself. It's recognizing that, there's no rush. And oftentimes if we dash too quickly, we end up going in the wrong direction. So we're going to have to make a course correction down the road. But as my mom would say, one step at a time. And trust as the journey unfolds, you will be ready to take the next step. One
step at a time. And goodness, Jane, we've taken some wonderful steps over these last 6 weeks, and I've learned so much from you and your wisdom. Getting ready to end today's podcast 6 series. I sense we will be doing more of these podcasts, but I also know that you have some more words of wisdom, and you've created a caregiving benediction that I think it would just be a terrific way for us to conclude our 6-series podcast today. So could you share with our listeners your caregiving benediction?
Absolutely. It would be my honor. And I actually wrote this, now almost 5 years ago. It's the closing chapter, short chapter, don't be afraid, for my book, Caregiving for the Genius. But I think it's a good way to wrap up our conversation around caregiving in general. And it ultimately is my hope and my prayer for all of us. A benediction is a short invocation in which we ask for help, blessings, and guidance. Therefore, there is no better way to conclude our conversation about the journey of caregiving than with a benediction. We need all the help we can get as we care for each other. So as the caregiving journey unfolds one step at a time, may we all be blessed in the following ways. May we have the courage to care for each other. May we feel companioned in the caregiving journey. May we have the wisdom to prepare to care. May we have the sustaining faith to confront our fears. May we graciously offer and receive help. May we discover strength unimagined during times of loss. May we remain hopeful during the times of trial. May we recognize the sacred in the ordinary. May we engage the journey one step at a time. May we be grateful for the moment. May we humbly answer the call to care. May we listen well, love deeply, and live fully all the way to the end of the road. May it be so.
Beautiful words of wisdom, Jane. I can't thank you enough for sharing those, and I can't thank you enough for the time that we've spent together and the journey that we've both been on, and your willingness to share, your willingness to allow me to be a part of your world. I can't thank you enough for doing these podcasts these last 6 weeks.
It's absolutely been my pleasure and delight to chat with you and to learn from you as well. And I think we've taken one step at a time and perhaps maybe even created some new dance moves. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
And Jane, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. So for one last time, for at least for our podcast series, you'd let our listeners know how they can find you online, how they can get your book, all your contact information, please.
Okay, I would invite everyone to check out my website, cardinallife.com. You can check out my upcoming events page and my media links for my book, blogs, podcasts, as well as videos. And if you have a particular question or just want to chat, send me an email at cardinallife@msn.com. I would love to continue the conversation.
Thanks again, Jane, for sharing your wisdom with all of us. And while I am sorry to see our podcast series end today, I know that this is just a new beginning for all of us because we are now prepared to care. We want to thank you, our listeners, and we welcome your comments and feedback. Send us an email at wecare@wholecarenetwork.com. I'm your host, Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy. I'm creating a life to love after caregiving ends through radio, writing, travel, advocacy, and being with awesome people like Jane Barton. Healing Ties and Prepare to Care are part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at thewholecarenetwork.com. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.